As socially distant cruise ships set sail in the Mediterranean this weekend, will a summer of sun, sea, selfies and swabs await? Well, a holiday abroad could happen, but here's the thing. After living an extremely local life for the past year, some would say pedestrian, how will we navigate our new world? Where will we look for a sense of direction? A traffic light system, of course. On Monday, Boris Johnson is expected to announce that when foreign holidays do return, restrictions will be based on a category system. So countries will be either rated red, amber or green, and that will be based on things like COVID rates and vaccination rates. Last summer, that traffic light system was trialled by a travel company and given the green light by the EU.
I really wish the government had introduced the traffic light system last summer. They were told about it, they could have done it, they didn't. The European Commission did introduce it at the end of last year, and it did enable more travel to take place, which in turn has helped the sector save lots of jobs. So it's a little late coming, but at least it's coming.
Countries like Cyprus, Greece and Croatia are already promising to offer vaccinated Brits quarantine-free entry this summer, while all those returning to UK will be expected to have pre-departure COVID tests. There are reasons to be hopeful for those living in care homes. In just over a week's time, children will be able to visit grandparents, in some cases for the first time in a year. How much of a lifeline is it for people in care homes to be able to finally see their grandchildren? It's quite a moment.
It's really lovely because seeing young children, you can see people's, faces brighten up when they see young children generally. So, older grandparents and great grandparents, it'll be lovely for them to be able to see this. And this is, these are cautious steps forward.
But over in Italy, the news is more gloomy as the country locks down over the weekend to avoid a surge of cases after criticisms that young professionals were being given the vaccine ahead of Italy's older citizens, as Rome's most notable octogenarian, Pope Francis, will for the second year deliver his Easter message to an empty St. Peter's Square. Meanwhile, worshippers attending Good Friday at this Polish church in South London were not expecting the Metropolitan Police to shut the service down.
This gathering is unfortunately unlawful under the coronavirus regulations we have currently.
The Met said they were concerned about the lack of social distancing inside. As choir boys looked on from the pews, the church in question issued this statement: "We regret that the rights of the faithful have been wronged on such an important day for every believer and that our worship has been profaned."
Well, I'm joined now by the Right Reverend Dr. Alan Wilson, Bishop of Buckingham. You heard the church statement there. They said they met all the government requirements and that the police brutally exceeded their powers. Do you sympathise with them?
Well, I think everyone's got to be very disturbed by a story like this. It's not the sort of thing we think should be happening. And I'm sure everybody involved, including the police, probably, are quite disturbed by what's going on and the way in which this has been. And I think particularly for religious congregations on a day like Good Friday, which is absolutely the sort of linchpin of the Christian year and the celebration of Easter, and always has been, sensitivities are very, very high indeed. So I can understand people being very upset. I do think that in these weird times we're living through, everybody is having their freedoms curtailed in all kinds of ways. And it's been very difficult for churches. This has been the weirdest Good Friday and Maundy Thursday I've ever experienced, apart from last year. And we always had this hope that, that somehow we'd be out of the woods by now. And it's just obvious that, as a matter of fact, we aren't where we would want to have been. And therefore, people are very sensitised, I think.
And you say it's been hard for churches. Is the problem here, given that the police said there were people crowded outside the church and they weren't wearing masks and socially distancing inside, is the problem here that the government guidance just isn't clear enough?
I think it hasn't been as clear as it could have been. I say that because my phone's been going with all sorts of questions coming up to Easter about what's allowed and what's not allowed. And some of the answers are quite surprising. You can have a dawn service as long as you do it in the churchyard, but if you have the same outdoor service on the village green, that's illegal. And people have said, well, why do I think that's the case? And I've had to say, well, as a professional man of faith and mystery, I just don't know. I don't know how that works, but that is how it works.
So you want ministers to clear this up?
Well, I think it's a bit late for them to do this for Easter now. I think there has been a greater degree of ambiguity than would be helpful. And that's partly reflected in the difficulties people have knowing what they're allowed to do and what they're not. One of our larger churches, we have about 300 churches in Buckinghamshire, was in touch in the week. And I did say to them, as we were working out their arrangements for Easter, look, do just have a word with your local police and make sure that they know what's going on, so that somebody doesn't drive by and see lots of people and wonder why they're there. And I think sensible precautions all round have to be the only way in these very strange circumstances we find ourselves.
I mean, you alluded to the fact earlier on that we were promised, or ministers promised at Christmas, when Christmas was cancelled, that we'd be able to celebrate at Easter. How frustrating is it for people that they can't observe these milestones with friends and family?
I think it's really frustrating, and particularly because Easter, from the beginning of Christianity, was the absolute linchpin of Christian worship. You know, going back to the first century, Easter is really the time when we connect with Christ risen in a very special way. And to have all that changed and to feel that somehow they don't understand and people are making regulations and taking something away from us is very upsetting. But of course, you know, as Christians, it's about loving our neighbours as ourselves. And if you love your neighbour, don't have a super spreader event, you know, because that's not particularly Christian either. And I think balancing those two very difficult areas and saying, how can you do this? Our local church has been very careful. You have to book in. They allocate seats based on your bubbles. All the seats are 2 or 3 meters apart. Yeah. Everybody has to ask. People can't hang around afterwards. I think churches all over the country will have been doing that and have been trying to make Easter as safe as possible.
Right.
And of course,
Bishop,
everybody in church, there'll be many more at home and online and in other ways.
Bishop Wilson, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Kathy.